Now I'd like to call on our opening keynote speakers, Kamuela Enos, Director of the UH Office of Indigenous Knowledge and Innovation, and Kūha Zane, Board President of the Edith Kanaka Foundation and Creative Director of Zane Designs. Together, this first plenary conversation will focus on setting the context for Indigenous-Centered innovation.
Aloha mai kākou. Wow, that was actually pretty strong. High five. No, thank you. I'm extremely honored to be able to stand in front of everyone today and actually stand alongside up here like Kamu, who actually has been a mentor for me. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to share a little bit. I heard Mwani say it earlier, but housekeeping, talking about housekeeping in a Hawaiian context means that your uncle's going to ask you, wait, who's your mother? So keeping that in mind, understanding that protocol is very important, especially in a Hawaiian context. And so most times, you talk about where you work and your resume and all of that kind of things. But in this kind of context, you got to talk about your ancestry and where you come from. So just to make this portion of housekeeping very quick, but this is my grandma, Edith, Ke kuhi kuhi puona na'ali'i o Kohala. And she hails from Honomu, but of course, grew up in Hilo, in Keukaha, and very prolific in her compositions as well as her work at the university, at the community college, and then also her work as a hula practitioner. She was at that point maybe 4 generations. I'm 6 generations, and there's still 2 generations after us of hula aiha'a practice. And that was a lot of the cultural depth that she gave to my mom, as well as to multitudes of people that dance within the halau. But that name, Kuhi Kuhi Pu'one o Na'ali'i o Kohala, Kuhi Kuhi Pu'one is kind of that term of like, Kuhi means to point, and then Pu'u is like hill, and then One is like earth. And so all of these terms together, when you kind of stick them together to each other, the idea of it is Kuhi Kuhi Pu'one is the architect of these heiau. So these different heiaus that you see out there, and heiaus have the little bit of, spirituality and woo-woo-ness to them to a certain degree. But in my context, what I understand is that a Kuhi Kuhi Pu'one was the architect to be able to connect this mass of land to the cardinal points that were out there, to the celestial bodies that were out there, so that they can read the environmental phenomenon that's going to be happening. So the Kuhi Kuhi Pu'one was actually the person to the left of the ali'i that would be giving the ali'i the environmental data that was coming out of reading from this heiau. And so just keeping that in mind, that Kuhi Kuhi Pu'one is an architect. Back in the day, I didn't really want to speak to any college people or academic people because I literally went to school for 17 and a half months, much to my mom's dismay. My mom still hopes that I'll be an architect at some point. Anyway, speaking about my mom, that's my mom to the left over there, and then Auntie Pua to the right, and my grandma in the middle. But a lot of the cultural protocol and a lot of the repertoire that has been passed down speaks to the volcanic activity and the volcanic phenomenon. And so all of the ancestral text that has been passed on to us through the 8 generations is these deep observations of the volcanic cycles and the volcanic phenomenon that happens. And my grandma's not bad. I was blowing my mind, and I still am trying to pay in cash so that I can hope one day that I'll get this back. I haven't gotten one back. Maybe one of you guys have, but they did honor her with a quarter, U.S. Mint quarter that honored Edith Kanaka as well as her life's work. And so it still blows my mind that it says Homai Ka'ike on a quarter. Anyway, pa'i lima for that one. And then, a couple things about my mom, too. Since she was already gifted with this cultural depth and knowledge, she took her time, especially during the Hawaiian Renaissance in the 70s and 80s, she took her time to explore her other interests, like sculpture, like fashion, like painting, like architecture. And so for her, she's my idol when it comes to that nexus point between tradition as well as modern context. And so I like to call her a Renaissance tita. The middle guy right there, he's a Pakeha guy from Kaneohe. Some of you might know him. I see some of you have supported my college fund. But him, I just call him a ballsy Pakeha guy because he was actually, he was selling properties here in Oahu, and then he made his way over to Hilo to be able to go to college. And he actually ran into my grandma at this paina down in Hawaiian Village in Kūha. And they just struck up a conversation like, oh, you should come and learn Hawaiian language with me up at the college. And, he obliged. And then eventually he started to dance hula. And the things that he was learning was the idea that hula is not only about just the choreography, not just emotions. It's actually about the ancestral texts that you learn through oli, as well as the associated arts, no matter if it's ohe kapala to be able to make your a'ahu or your regalia, or if it's going out into the forest to be able to gather your kinolau or to be able to make these leis. And it's all of these associated practices that are actually important to hula eha'a as a cultural practice as well as a kuahu practice. As he's learning all of these things, he's a college student. He didn't really have that much money. And so some nifty decision-making on his part to choose who he was going to start dating. Still kind of awkward to talk about it. But one of the biggest things was that he learned this process of doing screen printing and ruby lith from a friend that went to Roosevelt with him. And so he started to screen print these pareos. And these were his gifts to court my mom awkwardly. But lo and behold, he comes to the halau. My mom comes to the halau, and she's wearing one of the pareos. And then, the aunties in the halau are like, oh, Nalani, where you got that pareo from? Oh, the Paki in the third row. But since then, our product hasn't changed. It's been the same. The idea and mission of Six Zane Designs was quintessentially to be able to share the ancestral knowledge that was passed on through halau kekuhi and taken on by my dad and shared on a creative platform of aesthetics, and then also as a main medium of aloha shirt. So the aesthetics hasn't changed, the aloha shirt hasn't changed, but the cultural narrative has evolved over the years, and that's what we continue to share. Okay, so I'm sure there's some of the halau members in here that would probably give me grief about putting a picture of myself, but I'm presenting, so I'm gonna put whatever picture I want. Keep in mind that design, for me, is a very Western context when you're thinking about a career and when you're thinking about you're feeding into an economic system. But for me, it's the continual cultural practice that inspires my design and inspires my design process. And so for me, the continual cultural practice, I've been dancing for 32 years now, is the catalyst and is the genesis of my concepts when it gets to the design portion. And to me, the practice is what connects me back to Aina. And so just keeping in mind that cultural practice should be the lens that you do your career through. I leave this question for you. You can take a picture of it. One of my brilliant friends, Brent Kakesaku, he actually said this one time, and it really resonated with me because this question affects you no matter who you are, how long you've been here. If you have a place at Kuki'u and you're only here 1 week a year, it doesn't matter. How do you deserve to live here? And so I don't really have an answer to this question. Maybe it's just a rhetorical question, a question you can put into your pocket and question yourself every day. But I would say the context to this question generally is a financial one. Is that the correct answer? I don't know. Okay, so now Kamu shared an oli this morning, as well as that he learned from Kamuela Chun, who is also a student of Edith. But just in context, when you look at chanting, there's different ways to look at chanting and look at culture, and this is just my stream or my opinion on it. But to me, I like to look at users. The idea that if your 2 feet are on this aina, no matter if you're here and you just landed off the plane for a vacation, or if you're here for 3 generations because your grandparents came to be able to work the cane fields, or if you've been here and came on a canoe like 1,000 years ago, you're still a user. These are my 2 kids, by the way, Naholava and Loli'i. How you interact as a user is very important too. And so understanding each of these different portions of our culture as interactions as a user. And so if it's an awa ceremony that maybe you have been a part of or witnessed, or if it's hula that you've seen, or an oli that you've seen performed like we did see today, or if it's a kuahu that you upkeep, or if it's a fish pond, or if it's a heiau, all of these are interactions by the users to be able to interact with a finite resource of our hardware, which is aina. And so now, just taking the mysticism and the mythology out of the culture, just making it a little bit more simple. You're 2 feet here, you're a user. You see somebody interacting by chanting, or see somebody working on a fish pond, that's their software, and it's the finite hardware of Aina. But unfortunately, there's a slight disconnect. And I think that's pretty evident. I actually put this hardware here. I put that hard drive there before the Lahaina fires. And when the fires actually happened, I took a look back at this slide, and it was just even more prevalent that the disconnect is very wide. And it's going to take a lot of very intelligent people, especially people that are gathering here, to be able to repair that connect. And I think today is just little suggestions to be able to get back into that connection. I just wanted to kind of leave this as like a context of innovation. So I've been dancing for 32 years. You don't get to perform in our halau until you dance for 5 years. And even like people that aspire to dance at Merry Monarch, when you come to dance with us, we're like 5 years. And usually we have 100 people starting, and only 2 people actually make it onto stage 2. So with that in mind, and then also, I think the first time I got to choreograph a dance was maybe about 18 years in. And so that just gave me a little case study of the idea that you need to go through the rigor of culture and tradition to be able to have the privilege of creativity or the privilege of innovation. And so maybe from a Kanaka perspective, that would be a definition of what innovation is. And then I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly, but our Antipua Ka'ole Kanahele, who has stared at the Kumulipo for decades, literally decades. She stared at these 2,000-something lines, and over the years, she got stuck on these 3 lines, 1792 to 1794, Papuhuli Honua, Papuhuli Lani, and Papahanau Moku. How come in the 2,000 lines, only these 3 have 1 word in it? I don't know, but maybe if you're staring at it for decades, you would figure it out. And so over the years, she came to a sense that like, oh, Papa, like foundation, huli, like huli chicken, huli, like cycles, and then also honua, of course, earth. And so just kind of put into context, Papa huli honua, cycles of earth, Papa huli lani, cycles of the heavens, and then Papa hanau moku, the cycles of things that give birth. And then that's when she kind of put together that, oh, this is the Kanaka worldview. We put all and everything that we see into these 3 verses, into these 3 universes. And so when she started to break down that this is Papuku Makavalu, the idea of how Kanaka see the world, that gave us almost like this, a cheat code on our oli, a cheat code on our chants. Because now we can go back into our chants and use these 3 lenses and actually harvest environmental data that was embedded in these chants for thousands of years. So now our science evidence doesn't go back to 1770, whenever the person got off the boat, but our scientific evidence actually can go back thousands of years. And so what kind of environmental data is actually embedded into these oli? So just keeping that in mind. The process of this is from Edith Kanakole Foundation, which I was voluntold to be president with Antipua one day. I was really scared. I still am scared. But the process and the methodology that she passed on is what you see here, and I'll just kind of read through it very quickly. But deconstructing the akua, people talk about akua in many different lights. For this context, akua is simply life-giving energies. What are the life-giving energies that exist on this finite source of Aina that allow you to live here? And then also understanding that you can deconstruct these chants and see the data that's embedded in it. And then also deconstructing the ka'au or the mo'olelo that we have that have been passed on to us. And then doing your summarization and your dissemination of that. The other part of the process is where we include individuals like you who have your personal or professional insight. And so kilo and observation. One example, everybody got wet in the rain today. Oh, as a Hilo person, that feels so good for Oahu people to get wet in the rain. My question is, if you had an umbrella, were you still getting wet from the side? I don't know. Maybe you were. Okay, so if it was raining straight down, that's one type of rain. If it's raining from the side, that's ka'ua kikepa. These are all different kilos. These are all different observations that are out there. So you are just as validated in your observation just as long as you spend the time to see those intricate differences out there. So if there's one thing I wanted you to take away today, it would be these oli equals data and observations. And there's been multitudes of different examples of where we use these data, everything from architecture to urban planning to conservation. And then, of course, on my side of the spectrum is the graphic design and corporate branding. And then in the middle is still at the core, our main goal is education. And so no matter if it's education through tourism, hospitality. And so I also wanted to put this out here. This is kind of a long one here, but you know, hula, I think hula is still put into the entertainment context, generally. But for me, especially as a small business owner, I like to look at hula as an industry. And so if we were to look at my grandma, Edith, or even above her, Mary Kanaile, as a CEO, as a generational company CEO, what would her industries look like? This is what it would look like as an economic industry. So a breakdown of the hulas in schools, the festivals that they put on, the 29 kumuhula, and then also the hula competitions and festivals. Merry Monarch in itself is economic sustainability for Hilo. If Merry Monarch didn't exist, I wouldn't be talking to you today. You guys wouldn't be wearing some of our clothes. The education and community groups, the honorary PhDs, the additional PhDs that are in the charter schools, the nonprofits and community groups that have all existed from Edith Kanaka Foundation, the private and business sector. There's one chef that was inspired by the hello and danced in the hello. And then also one really cool one at the bottom, the soil analysis company. And all of these things are just parts of the industry of Ike Kupuna. So if you looked at Ike Kupuna as an industry, this is what economic sustainability, because only Edith Kanaka Foundation is supported by grants. Majority of these are all economically solvent on their own. Okay. For me, I'll click through this really quickly, but the Makavalu process has also inspired me because I went to school for design for 17.5 months to my mom's dismay. But one thing that I learned about design thinking is that it's very, cause and effect is really close to each other. And it just takes the time to analyze what are those levels between cause and effect to be able to come up with a solution. So I went through design school, I loved it and everything. And when I came back, Antipua showed this Makavalu, this Papaku Makavalu methodology, and I started to see some of the parallels between the two. And so I started to develop my own methodology of design. So it's the Makavalu design method. And these are the different phases within there. And then also there's a bunch of different aspects of it. There is the different Papuhuli Honua, Papuhuli Lani, Papahana Moku aspect. And you break it up into these different kinola, which is that middle column over there. So this is all my method. I'm being purposely kind of like vague about it because I don't want you to take my intellectual property. But the core things that I wanted you to pull out from here is the chance of place, the practitioner's perspective, and reciprocity. The reason why those are important is because these are the main items that I wanted you to pull out. It's intent-driven, it's rigor before creativity, it's experiential learning, it's reciprocal and generational, and most important, design thinking, I won't say any names, but design thinking a lot of time is human-centric. And I think we had enough time being human-centric, and we need to be Aina-centric because that's where we survive on. And so to me, this little design method is the idea of how to repair and mend that software to be able to have that Aina connectivity. And hopefully get back to a lifestyle that we can all enjoy. So I leave a couple points with you guys today, and this is one question that is really important, but how do we define Aina-aligned success? So, mahalo nui.
Hello, everybody. We had this presentation lined up, and then, I just want to go pivot a little bit because I think we're living in a really interesting context now. So what I wanted to do, and I'm going to share a little bit about the office and its genealogy, but why we started with Kūha, because I believe for me in my personal practice, there are 3 kumu that I look to. The first is the Kanaka Ole Ohana. Oh, sorry. the Kanaka Ole Ohana, and it's from them that they taught us the vertical. Like, how do we understand a sentient? Like, their sciences was a science as well as a spirituality, because we weren't empirically observing inert atoms. We were looking at sentience, and these, in our worldview, were our divine ancestors manifested in energies. So they always, when I'm learning from the Kanaka Ole, it's like, how do we orient to that practice of understanding what our sentient kupuna universe is telling us empirically as a science? And that provided the vertical. And then the horizontal, I was super lucky to learn under Antipunani Burgess and the beloved community practice of how do we then, humans, weave in our decision-making horizontally in a merit-based system where the people who are practicing experts understand how we engage in this space. And that's the horizontal. And then the center point, the middle part is the community-based economic development that I was raising with my dad. So I'm gonna start on a video, and I'm gonna cede my time to the kupuna real fast, because this video is a video of two uncles doing opelu fishing in Waianae. And why it's important for today, it shows their ancestral practices that they knew to manage a fishery sustainably. But also, the canoe they built, it was built by grants probably in 1985, 86, where my dad and his peers were wanting to stop unwanted development, but realized you cannot just hold signs. So they probably wrote some of the very first Aina-based education grants to do it. And that was like innovation that was around economic development in the 80s in a community of Waianae and how they designed it. And I was a little kid with my dad going to Kilgo's and hanging out with the uncles, and how that is the basis to me of the office. So I'm gonna cede my time to them for a little bit, then I'm gonna run for my slides. How's them? Okay, and get sound too, huh? Thank you, guys. So I Bull Harbor, if you know. So yeah, let's see. What you'll see is what they do is there's a practice called opelukua where these two uncles will go out and fish, feed a school of mackerel every day. And they knew the size of that koa, they knew exactly how big it was. And then today they're going to show how they call it, then how they feed it, and then how they use this hoop net to capture it and take only what they need, because on the bottom of a net, there's a rope that let people out. And while they're doing this, you can hear their voices, and these are the voices of people that were both in pre-contact society and a cashless society. They're economists and ecologists. And they're also spiritual leaders, because they understood the spirituality of the ocean. But think about all the sciences that are in play in this. I also want to honor Puhi Pao at Damako Kaina. Uncle Puhi Pao and his partner Joan were relentless in documenting the Hawaiian Renaissance. This is on YouTube. If you type in Opelu, O-P-E-L-U, fishing Hawaii, you can get this video. I watch it, man. Need inspiration. And uncles are in their 70s, in case you're wondering. Yeah. That's hammers. Okay, I can stop it there. I'm going to jump in a bit. But, you know, I share this for a reason. I'm the director of the Office of Indigenous Knowledge and Innovation, and almost nothing that I've done is technically in the innovation sector, as you would understand it. That's I really appreciate Vice President Sermos. That the word innovation is very audacious, and we purposefully call ourselves innovation because we want to be in this space where we can honor what those uncles and aunties and those others around us knew. Why I share that video is I dropped out of high school and I got my master. I went to college at Leeward Waianae. So I'm probably one of, I don't know how many in UH's executive arm is fully from UH. I went from GED to Leeward Waianae to Hawaiian Studies degree under Lily Kala and Hamlin Trask, and a master's in urban and regional planning under Karen Uemoto and Luciano Minervi. And I learned plenty there, but I learned even more about innovation from the community I was raised. My family were actively trying to resist unwanted development, but recognizing that, you know, holding signs isn't going to feed people. And how do you create economic development, learning what your ancestors do and deploying them in a community like Waianae? And if you're from Waianae, if you know Waianae, you know. It has a lot of roughness around it, but it was also the seat of where some of the last bastions of where this knowledge went to after we were dispossessed from our places and practices. So I was sitting in graduate school, and I took a non-math major because I dropped out of high school pre-algebra, and I didn't know how to do algebraic equations, so I thought I had survived it. I thought everything good, and I went to econ and got to my graduate level econ, and there's algebraic equations, and I was having a slight panic attack. It's like, oh, do I stick a pencil in my eye? Like, do I fake a seizure? And I was like, and I started thinking, because they're talking about endowments, and I was like, as that uncles came into bed, this was an endowment. The fisheries they're managing was the principal. The interest was how much they could take sustainably. And at all point, the uncles knew several layers of science. They knew the science of ocean and weather. It was the science of the fisheries. But they also knew economics of who had to eat upland relative to the endowment. And they wouldn't put all their fish out and celebrate it and call themselves rich. They would, in pre-contact society, you would have been killed faster than you can say kalamai. So they understood this as a legacy that was passed down along millennia of sciences of how you live in a place indefinitely, and that became the basis of my office. So I can put my presentation up. I'm giving my presentation just a couple minutes because I wanted to make sure we centered. And this is what we call indigenous innovation. And this is what we're here to serve, is to serve these practices in continuity through the Office of Research. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's me. Portuguese Hawaiians need timers. So this is OIKI. That's me. Really quickly, in 2019, Dr. Punihilep and Matt Lynch within the Office of and University System asked me if I'd be willing to move over where I was working in Waianae at Ma'o Farms as one of the directors to move into the university to start up an Office of Indigenous Innovation and Knowledge. And I was like, what, are you crazy? You don't like me? But then I started thinking, and so much of the work we're doing in our community organizations are actually being called innovative when we're actually trying to do restoration. And I'm like, why are you calling this innovation? We're trying to restore our stuff. And then as an entrepreneur and a kid growing up in Waianae, you got to pick up really fast what people is putting down. And I was like, oh, you can call this innovation because our project science solve for more than one linear metric. Like at Ma'o where I worked, we could get all of these different metrics from one investment. Like we had metrics of educational attainment, metrics of ecological wellness, metrics of food production. It's because our kupuna were nonlinear thinkers. They had to live in an ahupua'a system where you had to melt ecological and human interests at the same time. And I also began to see that community is carrying all the risk. Like we can do a lot of innovation. One of my favorite terms I heard is being at the table, you're on the menu. So I was like, man, we have to be able to explain to the system the value of what we're doing in their language, like hitting their metrics to support using our practices. And I was really lucky that Vasilis has been nothing but like, sure, come on. And I was like, that sharing risk is one of the most important parts of like creating change. And Vasilis took a risk to say, I will bring you into the office, kill what you eat, like figure out how we're going to work it, and gave me a lot of wonderful benign neglect. And I appreciate that because these types of work requires time and support. So, this is what we're here to do. You can read it on our webpage. I'm going to just go through some key principles of our office, and I'm going to just skip some of the other slides if that's okay. But this is the framework that we work under, the PEVA. If you take nothing else, and maybe the other slide we'll have later on how we function. This is a big one. But now a PEVA is a butterfly-shaped wedge that we use to fix fractured implements. And my wildly unemployable youth, 17-year-old, 17, after dropping out of high school, my very frustrated father gave me a job to make papaku'iai, make the play boards. And I cracked it. And my dad has a super unique capacity. His truck would pull in as soon as I did something stupid. And I was like, oh, fuck. And I was like, crap. And so I knew about PEVAs, and I was almost power with the board, and that was my beer money for the weekend. And I was like, oh, my goodness. And my dad suffers fools lately. So he came walking in and said, oh, Dad, we have a PEVA. We have to fix this. And he looked at me, and he's like, no, we're not going to fix this. We're going to walk through what happened. And the first thing I learned from this is equity, reciprocity, and transparency kind of boiled down from that memory. The first part of equity is like being willing to have a real conversations with people as peers, not just glancing over the people that you want to fix a fractured space with. And he told me, look, you have to understand the wood first before you fix them, because either the wood is rotten and we're going to throw the board away, or you wasn't listening when I told you not to whack it around the knot. What was it? And I was like, well, you ask if you know. I thought that super loud, but I didn't. So it was because I cracked it. And I think about when we want to rush to fix solutions, we want to rush to make feeling good part. We have to stay like, what was the function of this thing you want to fix first, if you truly want to fix it, and who cracked it? If it was intrinsically wrong, then why are you fixing it? And if it's right, what are you going to do to fix it in? So that was the first part of a PEVA. The second thing about the PEVA and why I believe it's a beautiful symbol, it holds both sides. Because once you go through the conversation of what was it like how does it work, you, on the other side, understand the thing that you're fixing as much as the person who's using it. Then you understand the history of the crack. Then you can begin to understand who's been holding it down in the space without any resources to hold that side. And how do you come in to meet them as peers? And that's reciprocity. And this part of the process doesn't live in PR promos, it lives in grant line items, and it lives in when are people invited to the conversation. And like what is the process of invitation and being invited to serve. And the last part about it I love is that it's transparent. Like the Japanese wabi-sabi, like you paint the cracks. Like you highlight that it's broken, and people took the time to fix it. And you would only do this to something you want to pass down across generations. This is a lineal thing you're serving for. So this is the kind of thing I thought about in entering into the university. I have 9 minutes. So these are some of the key things that I wrote, all the stuff I wrote before I came to enter into this space, my Pico and my Pale. and how I would enter into the Office of Research with the support of Vasilis, coming with the communities I know, to be at the table, not on the menu, and to be able to think about how do we equitably work with our communities through research. So this was something we wrote, like my idea of what pre-contact society was doing. It was optimized for how people could live in space. Like our chiefs saw the landscape and the people as asset, as their wealth. They weren't commoners or serfs. Like the Maka'inana, as you saw Uncle Eddie and Uncle Walter, they were the people of the land, but they weren't wage slaves. They were powerful knowledge holders. If you were a chief, you better be on the right side of their knowledge, because we have a wonderful history of killing chiefs in Hawaii. They're the actual people that told you what is needed to be successful. So this is how I felt we were. Then this happened. And I was like, yeah, we got relegated to poverty, and landscape got relegated to this challenges. And we think history starts in wherever you come to the problem. It's always been broken. Let's fix them in silos. And our point is, nope. So how do we see the communities as experts, researchers as allies, and we invest together in their practices where we're calling them innovation. We're treating them like an ecosystem of innovation. And how are we setting these types of contexts up? So how will we know? I put this out there, and I'm the director, so I put myself out to be put on the emo if it doesn't work. At the community level, investment is driven directly to community organizations. Via research, it's co-designed with them. That the equity for us isn't inclusion, equity is co-ownership. The research that shows that moving things that are once anecdotal to peer-reviewed hard data points, like our community organizations are doing these things. And therefore, they need a long-term investment and the system as much as the community understands the value. And therefore, with this research, our government, policymakers, philanthropy, the different types of things they need for changing the mental model to understanding our communities as innovation. I'll go through this quickly because I've done this presentation before, you can probably Google it. But this is the triple PICO analysis that we use. But I want to get to how we've created our metrics. They're all things you can search, but I want to get to this point right here. Our organizations in a community were able to create metrics that the systems want. I worked at Mao, and Kūha is going to be speaking. We had this project, like a community organization in Waianae went back in like 2015 and sending this much kids from Waianae, if you know, to college while growing food. Like these are metrics the system is looking for. These are metrics the states are trying to hit and not able to without the intervention of community. Not saying that we don't want the state. No, it's like how are we finding the right type of partnerships and identifying the shared metrics to work together and build this as a practice. And this is the things that equipped me to go to UH to do this work. We had the opportunity with Dr. Liko Mauna Kea. He studied the gut microbiome of students at the farm and found that they are 50 to 60% less likely to develop type 2 diabetes. And this was the first time I felt like, biomedical research wasn't extractive on us. Like, going to study us and tell us we're sick. Once again, as a business model, as much using the power of research to affirm a community intervention. We use this research like all the time to fundraise, to do all the different things necessary. But what is a university needs is novel research and novel funding opportunity. It provides Dr. Mauna Kea with the same type of assets, the same type of really desired outcomes. And we're able to create this opportunity to research as mutually equitable empowerment. And the other thing, I was a lecturer at the Department of Urban and Regional Planning and did classes on community-based planning and worked with my friend who has a taro farm in the middle of a shopping center in Prairie Ridge, Anthony DeLuz. And the question we asked and a bunch of graduate students went through is what are all the billable services in a low-ecological can start charging society? And we can articulate what are all the metrics that the society is looking for. So we did it. We had the students run through this over 3 semesters to look at what are the inputs. KS and the INO organization were the holders of the report. Looked at what are the inputs, where's the medium, and then these are all graduate students, but woo, he was came out to low 6 figures. And that is a real important point because in the pre-contact society, our Maka'inana were line items in the chief's budget. We didn't write grants. There was patient capital that always went from the system investing in these places of practice. So I'll close with, this is our office. Oh, got squished. I wrote all of these things on the back of a napkin before I entered into the Office of Indigenous Innovation. Like, if we do this, we're going to be okay, and if not, oh boy. But there's three kind of centers, I felt, circles that we existed in. The first and the foremost was the bottom. It was like our ancestral community practitioners that are either conserving their traditions or conserving a landscape. How are they? What is their role? Our circle of education and community, the education community we work with, and then our partners in government and industry. And you see, like, the metrics they use on the output aren't Hawaiian, quote unquote. Like, we're looking for 21st century citizens, 21st century spaces of employment, but the middle part is normalizing indigenous systems as a means to resilience and abundance. And we can share this slide for you, but you can see, like, all those metrics in the core, like job creation, degree retainment, measures of economic development, all of those things are kind of what my dad them are asking when they started, like, can we bring these uncles down and just try to do fellow fishing in the 80s to create jobs so our kids don't go to prison? It's following the same genealogy of thought. So I'll close here with the Auntie Puanani Burgess, passed, but she always taught that the most first and primary and powerful technology is a technology of community. When you understand community as a technology, and that's your first technology, the other technologies make sense in ways that are non-extractive and exploitative. And I think now we see society so split. The cool thing about indigeneity is that we're not Democrats or Republicans. We already survived our apocalypses multiple times. We've seen everything crash, and we're still here, and we're still resilient. So hopefully this is a hopeful space. And I think I made it right to 8:28, 2 minutes to spare. So this is Kūha and I's intention was not to claim we know or hold everything that is about indigenous innovation. It is more like my spirit animal is, I don't know, emoji. It's like, is this going to work, right? Is this something that's going to do? I don't know what it will look like, but I know where I came from. I know what we've done. And I think this is an emergent time where we can figure out how we do these things together, is because, the world is an island now. It's a hot island. And hot islander thinking represents a corpus of 4,000 years of Pacific Islander thinking as we migrated, where we could see the limits of our ecosystems and our boundaries. And like for the last couple of years, we've had like the circular economy and water summits. They're all speaking to how uniquely situated Hawaii is to solve for global problems, but it comes and it lives in our communities in partnerships with the university. So all the speakers and the speakers to come follow through this lineage, with the Center for Indigenous Innovation and Health Equity talking about the health aspect of it and how we do our research, with Kari and her incredible team, and Shaylin, our incredible leader, talking about how we take this knowledge and we create contemporary tools for practitioners, with Alec and incredible and Nikota talking about what are social impacts, social innovations that can come from this work, and closing with Vasilis and his team talking about what this allows universities to do. So thank you all for taking a risk, for coming out here, and mahalo Vasilis and all of our speakers for coming today. Mahalo nui.